Welcome to the Ripple Effect Podcast, where small shifts create powerful changes. Hey there, I'm Mika Hill, the Pivot Master. I built and sold a successful business by learning to turn life's friction into fuel. Now I'm helping others pivot with purpose, build unshakable resilience, and transform their challenges into momentum. Let's get started with this week's podcast. Welcome back, and if this is your first time listening, you're jumping in at a powerful point. This is part 3 of a 3-part series I call the Resilience Arc, and it's not just a framework. It's the lived process behind every version of you that's ever had to shift, stretch, or rise from the mess. In episode 64, we started with the pause, the space between what was and what's about to be. That sacred stillness where you stop pushing and start listening, where the apostrophe lives, that moment most people avoid, but it's the one that actually changes you. Then in episode 65, we flipped the grit switch. We talked the pivot, the moment you stop performing, stop pleasing, and start moving from alignment instead of adrenaline, where clarity kicks in and you shift directions, not because you're running, but because you finally know where you want to go. And that brings us here. If you've been walking with me through this series, you've already felt it. The shift, the unraveling, the uncomfortable clarity. You've stopped long enough to see it, hopefully, and you've stretched far enough to feel it. And whether you knew it or not, you've already begun your rise. You've paused, you've pivoted. You didn't just fall apart, you reassembled. And so now we're going to continue to rise, not in some polished, Instagrammable way, not with 5 a.m. alarms and green smoothies and perfect morning routines, in a real way. The awkward, honest, a little sweaty palm kind of rise, where your choices speak louder than your doubt, where your nervous system finally exhales and your energy says, this is the version I trust to lead. Because this version, they're not waiting for permission. They're already in motion, and that motion might not be fast. It might not even be visible yet, but it's happening. And if you're not sure whether you've started rising, let me show you what it looks like. Have you ever caught yourself doing something the old you wouldn't have dared? Like saying no without spiraling, or walking into a room that used to shrink you and realizing you didn't contort yourself to fix? That's a rise. It's not louder, it's not flashier, it's just cleaner, truer, more you. Because this version, they don't need to be recognized. They're too busy being real. And you might be thinking, okay, this all sounds great, but is it supposed to feel this off balance? And the short answer is yes. Because rising doesn't always come with clarity and momentum. Sometimes it comes with resistance, with second guessing, with shaking legs and unfinished sentences. It's not polished, it's not perfect, and it's definitely not the part you'd post about first. Let's be honest, the rise isn't the part, like I said, that you post about. It's the part that happens before the glow, before the bounce back, before you even know what's next. It's raw and it's unfiltered, and most of the time, like I said, it's quiet. But that doesn't make it any less real. In fact, it's usually the quiet rebuild moments where the real power returns. The ones where nobody's watching, where the decision to keep moving doesn't get a standing ovation, but still matters. And that's when you realize this version rests. It recalibrates. It reclaims, not because it's a luxury, but because it's a requirement. This version of you doesn't rise by force. They rise because they finally stopped abandoning themselves in the name of keeping up. Let me ask you something. What if you've already started rising, but you've been waiting for it to look a certain way before you believed it was real? What if rising isn't about doing more, but noticing when you finally doing things differently? When you pause instead of react, when you don't explain yourself for protecting your peace, or when you walk away from something you could handle but you don't want to carry anymore. That's all the rise. And it doesn't need to be loud to be legit, because this version, they don't need applause. They're too busy building a life that actually fits. This version of you, it doesn't hustle for crumbs. And let me tell you, I've felt this too. Back when I left the waste industry, people would ask, "So what do you do now?" And I'd freeze, not because I didn't know who I was, but because I hadn't found the language for this new version of me yet. Even recently, someone asked me, "What do I do?" And I hesitated. For a second, I almost defaulted to the safe, polished answer because that new identity, the one I know I've stepped into, it's still catching up with my voice. And that's the thing about the rise. It doesn't just shift your actions, it redefines your identity. And sometimes you meet a new version of you before you found the words to introduce them. When I think about what the rise actually feels like, it's not always clear or confident, and it definitely doesn't come with a roadmap. What comes to mind instead is a moment I once witnessed. It's simple, but it stuck with me, so I want to share it with you. I was taking riding lessons at the time, and when I pulled up to the barn, there was this young horse. It was only a few hours old, and it was still shaky. Its legs were too long. It was unsure what to do with its own weight. And I remember standing at the fence, just watching, holding my breath a little, thinking, "Come on, keep trying. You're going to be okay. Keep trying." And then it stood, wobbly, uneven, but it stood. Then it started to move a little, and then it ran. And I don't know how to explain it, but when it took off, I felt like I'd been right there with it the whole time, like somehow I needed that moment too. And I didn't see myself in it then, but I do now, because that's exactly what rising looks like in my life. I stood even when I was shaky. I moved even when the path felt unclear. And I ran eventually with a fire I forgot I had. That early rise doesn't look like confidence. It looks like instinct, like something inside you whispering, "Keep going, even if it's not pretty yet." And now, when I think of rising, I think of that reel. Maybe you've seen it. The horse jumping the fence, sprinting forward and taking its place at the front of the bicycle race. And the soundtrack is Sia. "I'm unstoppable. I'm a Porsche with no brakes. I'm invincible. Yeah, I win every single game." I know I'm not a singer, but that is the rise. And that's what I see in my mind's eye every time I think of it. The gate wasn't opened. It wasn't invited. It just knew where it belonged. Not waiting, not asking, just becoming. So if you're finding your footing, if you're standing there with shaky legs and a strong gut feeling, you're not behind, you're not off track. You are becoming. And let me tell you, this version of you, it doesn't wait for the invitation. It becomes the leader. It's unstoppable every single day, not because it's easy, because it's yours for the taking. And that moment says a lot. But what comes after? Because the rise, it's not just the takeoff. It's what you do after you've jumped the fence, after the crowd fades, after the adrenaline settles. The rise isn't a finish line. It's not the end of your story. It's the start of you actually living it. It's when your schedule starts aligning with your priorities, when your boundaries don't need backup singers, when your body no longer flinches at the sound of your own needs. The rise is subtle, it's layered. It's that moment when you realize your decisions feel cleaner. Your energy doesn't leak. You no longer are trying to prove your worth through productivity. You don't just believe differently, you move differently. That's embodiment. Not because you rehearsed it, but because you became it. And here's something I wish more people said out loud. Just because you've risen once doesn't mean you're done. The resilience arc is not a one and done. It's not linear. It spirals, it loops, and it deepens. You'll pause again. You'll pivot again. You'll rise again. Not because you failed, but because you're evolving. And when you know how to move with those shifts, how to breathe through every pause, pivot with clarity, and rise without rushing, changes everything. You stop fearing the spiral and you start trusting the rhythm. And each time you move through this arc, it's not a repeat, it's a refinement. Every pause sharpens your awareness. Every pivot aligns you deeper. Every rise gets clearer, it gets calmer, and more sustainable than the last. So you don't have to prove anymore. You just align. And when you do, when you start living from that place, it all shifts. Not overnight, not all at once, but undeniably it shifts because alignment, that's what fuels a rise you can actually sustain. And let me tell you, you are in it. You're moving through it. The pause, the pivot, the rise, not once, not perfectly, but honestly. And I think if you look, you'll realize you've paused. You're learning to reclaim your breath, and not just in an inhale, exhale sense. You're reclaiming your energy, your clarity, your sanity, the version of you that doesn't just power through, but knows how to steady yourself in the storm. Hopefully you're pivoting, maybe once, maybe 100 times, but each one a shift closer to alignment, each one proof that you're not stuck, you're still choosing. And now you're rising, one grounded decision, one boundary that holds, one nervous system that finally feels safe in your own presence. Because this version, they're not hustling for approval. They're not shape-shifting to be accepted. They move like someone who finally knows. You don't have to prove, you just align. You're not trying to be strong anymore. You're learning to be steady for yourself. And this version of you showing up now, they're not waiting, they're becoming. And this version of you, they're not chasing, they're calibrating. They're creating ripple effects you can't even measure yet. So keep going. You're already in motion. And if this episode stirred something in you, if you felt yourself in the pause, if you recognized your pivot or caught a glimpse of the version you're becoming, don't let it end here. The resilience arc is just the beginning. Your rise, like I said, is already in motion, and you don't have to do it alone. There is a whole movement waiting for you at thegritswitch.com. Not one that demands more from you, but one that teaches you how to rise different. Tools, journals, courses, coaching, whatever chapter you're in, there's something to meet you. And so if you're ready to move from insight to aligned action, go take a look. Let this be the moment you stop circling. And if you aren't following this podcast yet, please click to subscribe. And until next time, this is Mika Hill, reminding you, I'll meet you in the rise. Thank you for being part of today's Ripple Effect. Remember, every pivot point in your life, even the challenging ones, carries the potential for transformation. The resilience you're building today is creating ripples that will impact your tomorrow in ways you can't yet imagine. If today's episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear your story. Connect with me at True Basis Health or leave a review sharing your biggest takeaway. Until next time, this is Mika Hill reminding you that you're just one purposeful pivot away from your next breakthrough. Keep creating those ripples.